Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is February 12th, 2019, and we are very excited to be recording this episode in front of a live audience at, I'll call it the Mindy Gledhill Studios. What is this place called?
It's called the Forge Collective.
The Forge Collective in downtown Provo, Utah. Can we have an applause, everybody? Yeah. Live audience. And we are here to celebrate and explore this incredible album that we've been waiting for years, whether we knew it or not. The album is called Rabbit Hole by Mindy Gledhill. And Mindy Gledhill is no stranger to Mormon Stories Podcast. We did have Mindy on a few years ago to talk about her faith journey up until then. Gina Colvin also had her on for kind of a second part to that interview on A Thoughtful Faith. Mm-hmm. But between the two, if you want to go back and really dig deep into the story of Mindy Gledhill, between those past episodes, you can geek out all you want. Today, we're going to do kind of a summary. We'll get you up to speed. For those of you who don't know who Mindy is, for the three of you who don't know who Mindy is, we'll do a quick overview of her life. But Mindy is an amazing human, but she's also a singer and a songwriter and a musician. Some of you who followed, Mormon EFY music in the 2000s would have heard some of her music maybe on an EFY album or two. She also has several albums just as a solo artist. Some of the albums are
Anchor is probably my most well-known album.
Yeah.
And then Pocket Full of Poetry, Winter Moon, and Rabbit Hole.
And I remember Sparks, what's her name? In Dancing with the Stars.
Oh, Lindsay Sterling?
Sterling. She even chose your song for one of her dances.
Yes, so she used the Anchor song for one of her dances, yeah.
So, Mindy's a world-class artist. You've also done some collaboration with the pop electro music guy.
Cascade.
Cascade. Yeah. Cody will know who Cascade is. So Mindy is a world-class musician and performing artist and raised LDS. And today we're going to be celebrating her new album, which is in and of itself is a marvelous work and a wonder. But also at least one of the themes from the album is exploring her faith journey and her experience as she's grappled and struggled with her faith. But it's about much more than that as well. And so we're just thrilled to have you guys with us to share in this story. Is there anything else we should add at the beginning before we jump in?
I think you nailed it.
Did we nail it?
Yeah.
All right. And what we're going to do, and we're super excited about this, we are going to be having Mindy and a few of her musician colleagues do performances of her songs in sort of an acoustic, minimalistic sort of arrangement to supplement this interview. So we'll kind of go interview song, interview song, interview song. We'll do some Q&A at the end. And we reserve the right, if there's some technical difficulty, to just plug in songs from the album if necessary. But I just want to cover the bases in case that. But I don't think that'll be necessary. But is that all right?
That is all right.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So without any further ado, Mindy Gledhill, welcome back. Let's give Mindy a warm Mormon Stories welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Mindy, there are going to be people that haven't heard our original interview. So let's just spend a few minutes giving them kind of the 500, foot view of your early story as a Mormon.
Okay.
Just a quick overview. Yeah.
I grew up in a really awesome, devout LDS family. 9 kids. We grew up on the north coast of California until I was 13, and then my dad got called to be a mission president in Madrid, Spain. So I lived in Spain for 3 years from the age of 13 to 16, and then moved to Provo and went to Provo High my junior and senior year.
And you're a Winkle, right?
Winkle is my
That's your maiden name?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that, I'm sure that Spanish that you learned comes out a bit in the Adios Carino song.
Yes, the last track on the album is in Spanglish.
Yeah, no, you have good Spanish. And you did a Spanish song just recently, right?
I did a cover of Despacito.
That was awesome. So check that out. That was really good. That was really good. Yeah, we got applauses already for that Despacito song.
Thanks.
Okay, so your final couple high school years were here in Provo.
Yes.
And what did the church mean to you and your family growing up?
Yeah, it meant everything. It was a part of just our everyday speak, just everything that we did. It all revolved around the church. It was, yeah. I mean, I'm sure like a lot of people here, it was very central to everything we did.
So the typical family prayer, scripture study, family home evening, all that stuff?
Yeah. And I think from the time I can remember, my dad always had callings that demanded a lot of his time. He was a bishop, and then a stake president, and then a mission president, and then got called to be in the second quorum of the 70, and was a temple president after he did that.
Your dad was a temple president? I'd forgotten that. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Which temple?
Sacramento.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
And how would you have described your faith testimony / devotion in high school? Were you one of those rebellious kids? Were you like Bali Mormon? Were you somewhere in the middle?
I was very dedicated to the LDS faith. It was super important to me, and I just have a lot of really, for the most part, a lot of good memories, like of that being a part of my life and my upbringing. But yeah, I wasn't a rebel in high school. It was, for the most part, just really important to me to like follow the rules, and I was, I think, pretty good at being a rule keeper.
Okay. We're good at that sometimes.
Yeah.
And what was your relationship to music and as a high school kid?
I was a late bloomer in music from like a technical standpoint. I took some piano lessons in elementary school on and off, but that was the extent of my musical training. But there was always music around me. I just feel like music is such a big part of church. And so that was, I think that's where music really entered into my life, is through religious worship. And I could hear music in like everyday little things, like the honking of the family van. I would like harmonize, like an interval with that in my mind, or the frequency of the microwave, just little things. So I feel like music was a part of me naturally, but again, just technically, I didn't have a lot of training. But my dad would always ask us to sing, like for zone conferences when we lived in Spain, and
was it a musical
and for
family?
Firesides. My sisters all, I think, sing really well, and a lot of them took piano lessons. So in that way, yeah, we were musical, but it never like we never
Von Trapp
competed.
family, not
it
like
wasn't.
the Von Trapp
yeah,
family. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So in high school, were you dreaming of becoming kind of a pop star or a Mormon pop star or whatever?
Yeah. Like from the time I was 13, I remember I had like a little Walkman, and I would make cassette tape recordings at the piano, and I listened to all of, the LDS artists of the time, Michael McLean, Julie D'Azevedo.
Who's in the audience, by the way?
And loved all of that music, and just I don't.
What about Afterglow? Did you listen to Afterglow?
No, I didn't.
You did?
That one was a little hard.
Do you guys anyone remember Afterglow?
To do, but
it was like Mormon's version.
I think
it
was a little bit before me.
What was the group? The Air Supply. It was like Mormon Air Supply. Was Afterglow? Okay, no Afterglow.
No.
Okay, but Michael McLean.
Yeah.
Julie D'Azevedo.
Yeah, and that
those EFY tapes.
That inspired, me to sit at the piano and want to write.
So did you start writing songs?
So I started, and again, not much training, but just me, plunking around on the keys and trying to figure things out.
Okay.
So yeah.
And so you always wanted to be a pop star. Did you think it would happen? Like, did you know it was going to happen?
I think in my brain, I couldn't compute how people actually got there or did that, but I really remembered I enjoyed the connection that I felt when I would sing with people, at firesides or at zone conferences, when my dad would have us sing. And I enjoyed the feeling of sitting at a piano and, playing and singing. I don't know. I just felt a connection in that, and just felt so drawn to it. And that never left me.
So if I'm remembering our interview, you ended up at BYU and you ended up in the music program, which is super competitive, and you didn't have kind of that formal training that probably other people. Talk about that really briefly.
I got in, I think, by sheer accident. You have to take a written exam 3 times to get in, and you have to audition. To back up just a little bit to give that some context, when we moved to Provo from Spain, I went to Provo High. I was 16 and I wanted to try out for everything. I tried out for the school musicals, never made it. I tried out for the chamber choir, didn't make it. I tried out for dance company, didn't make it. And so I just thought I can either let this dictate my path for me and make it mean that I'm no good at this, or I can let it feed a little fire inside. So I decided to let it feed a little fire inside, and I just kept auditioning for things. So, and I started to create opportunities for myself where I wasn't getting into anything. So I got an internship at a recording studio. I started a band, and we signed up to sing at the assemblies. So I started to just do things on my own. And then when I graduated from high school, same story. Like, I tried out for women's chorus at BYU, didn't make it.
What?
I tried out for Young Ambassadors, didn't make it. I tried out for those singing and dancing shows at Lagoon, didn't make it.
I love those.
I even tried out for this group called the Latter-day Sounds. It was a fireside group, and I didn't make it. So
that's a lot of, failure. That's a lot of rejection.
So all of that preceded auditioning for the music major at BYU. But I think I had auditioned for so many things at that point and maybe built up, a little bit of just resistance to being afraid of standing in front of a panel of judges because I'd done it so many times. So my audition went well. And I think I had things for my resume. I had high school band, internship at a recording studio. So that looked good. But then the test, you have to take a written exam. They give you 3 chances. I took it the first time and failed. I took it the second time and failed. Just guessing on everything because I didn't have a music theory background. I took it the third time guessing on everything, and I passed it by 1 point. So if I hadn't passed by 1 point, I wouldn't have gotten in. I think, yeah. So yeah.
That's amazing. It's a really competitive program. So
it is, yeah.
That's a lot of resilience. Is that just how you've always been, or did you have to develop that?
I don't know why, but I think I've always been a pretty driven person with the things that I want to do. I don't know why.
That's awesome. Do you have that moment of discouragement, that story about like this moment of discouragement where you overcame it, or there's been 1,000 of those along the way?
I think 1,000 of those along the way, and still
for any aspiring artist.
Yeah, I'm an independent artist right now. And yeah, there are constant setbacks and challenges. Then sometimes I'm just like, what am I doing? But again, that connection that I feel with people has never left me.
And at your core, what has music been about for you? Why do you do music? Like, do you have a core reason other than just love for it?
Yeah, again, it's that connection. I just feel like music is this universal language that has the ability to transcend our borders and our languages, and it has this power to heal people, and it's a real therapy for people, and it's my therapy. It's how I process all of my life experiences. So every album that I've ever written is really just a reflection of what I was going through at that time in my life, including Rabbit Hole.
So tell us really quickly kind of how you got into the business after graduating from BYU, and talk a little bit about the connection between your early career and the church.
Mm-hmm. So when I got into the School of Music at BYU, the ball started to roll for me a little bit. I went to a workshop one day and played some of my music that I had recorded. And for the most part, the panel of judges that were critiquing songs kind of like picked it apart and kind of ate it alive. But there was one person afterwards who approached me and said, I thought that was really great. And his name was Jeff Simpson. He was the CEO of a company called Excel Entertainment at the time. And and so I started to meet with Jeff, and then Kenneth Cope, who produced my first LDS album, and yeah, they released my first record. So,
and what's it like to be a Mormon sort of pop music musician in terms of fans or listeners and reputation and place in the culture and in the community? Give us just a small, are there like, everyone thinks you're super righteous, everybody tells you save their testimony or you strength, just what's that like? Are there expectations?
I think I always viewed it as like a real honor. Like, I took it really seriously and tried to let it be something, again, that was about serving people, and about just helping people through hard times. So, I still, even now, like, I will meet people that will say like, oh, you got me through my mission. Like, I listened to your music throughout. We burned your CD for our whole mission. And, like, it actually, like, that means a lot, I don't take that for granted.
But it seems like after that, maybe after that first album, you didn't want to be niched into Mormon pop music. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were some things that started to, like, I think happen internally for me that just didn't jive with being signed to an LDS record label. And there was a bit of a transition there as well. I was signed to Excel Entertainment, and then they merged with Deseret Book and kind of took over their record label at Deseret Book. So I was sort of grandfathered into Deseret Book's record label called Shadow Mountain. And I had started to record my second album with them, and just kept feeling like, just some dissonance with that. And I think in that process, no one had noticed that my contract had lapsed. And when I noticed, I just asked, could I pay for what we've recorded so far and take this music? And it wasn't really sounding like church music anyway. I just felt like this sounds a little more like indie pop music. It doesn't seem like it's going to work anyway. And there were things that were difficult for me about working with that record label. I'm sure anyone could say that about any record label in the world.
Yeah. And we talked about that in our interview some. So those who want the skinny and the details can refer to that episode. What are just a couple of the songs, the churchy songs from that first album that some of our listeners may have heard or may remember, just to kind of jog their memory? Are there some biggest hits?
It's been so long, I'm having a hard time.
Anyone in the audience know?
The Sum of All Grace is the name of the album.
Okay. Was there a title track? Is that a tattoo on your wrist?
Yes.
That's awesome. Okay, we'll get to that. Sum of All Grace?
It's called The Sum of All Grace. A lot of the songs were actually cover songs of other Christian artists, like who had music careers in evangelical, like corners of the music market. And the LDS music market and the other Christian music market really don't mix. I think they just, again, there's animosity towards LDS people.
Because we're not Christian to them.
Yeah, Yeah. Anyway, so for some reason, I covered like a lot of those songs because people in the LDS market weren't familiar with them. So Small Enough by Nicole Nordeman was one on the album. I Will Rest in You by Jackie Velasquez, I think is her name. Anyway, Those were some of the popular songs.
Okay. All right. So let's so you did a few albums, three solos after that, or two solos
I just
after
did
that?
one album with Excel Entertainment.
But after that...
Okay, yeah. Then after that, I bought my way out of, that deal and just went independent in 2007 and released my first indie album called Feather in the Wind. And I've just been an indie artist ever since.
And then the other albums again are...
So it's been almost 12 years.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So Feather in the Wind, then...
Feather in the Wind, Anchor. Winter Moon, which is a Christmas album, Pocket Full of Poetry, Rabbit Hole. And I did a Hive Riot. Hive Riot is a project that... it's an electronic kind of 80s throwback project that I did somewhere in there.
And that's what we featured, yeah. So
yes.
Buy all those albums, listeners. I command you. And okay, so along the way, you married Ryan, right?
Yeah, I married Ryan before, like,
Somewhere along the way.
I was 19 when I got married, and shortly after got that first record deal with Excel Entertainment.
And children?
Yeah, we had our first son when I was 20, and then second son when I was 22. So I had 2 kids by the time I was 22, and then 30 when we had our third son. So we have 3 boys.
3 boys. Okay, and they're darling. Okay, so let's jump right into now the kind of one of the main themes. How did the Mormon dream start to fray? Like, what happened to that EFY pop Mormon star? Like, what happened?
I think that there are an array of things that kind of happened, and fray is a great word. Like, little things that started to come apart one by one. And I think for me, like, my original trip through the temple had some things that were really hard for me to swallow, things I wasn't prepared for. But I think
things they've changed, or
I don't know.
Oh,
I haven't been in a while, in maybe 5 years.
For those who don't know, they've made a few changes recently, but okay.
Yeah, things that have changed. Yeah. So that was hard for me, but I just resolved to just, I'll understand later. I'm just gonna be patient with this and have faith.
Probably some of the patriarchy or male-female kind of things.
Yeah, I didn't realize all of the little things that really made me feel like a second-class citizen. And I would go out to my car after temple sessions and just kind of slump over the steering wheel and just weep. And just ask God why it was so hard for me to go through something that I was raised to view as the pinnacle of my whole life experience and form of worship. And I just couldn't understand it, why there was just so much dissonance there. So that just kind of sat with me for a long time, but I kept going, just kept trying to understand.
Were you able to talk to Ryan about that at the time, or were you scared?
Yeah, he kind of just didn't understand either, and he didn't, I think just because it was also kind of hard for him, he didn't go very often, so I would just go on my own usually and, just try to understand.
Okay. So that was where it started.
That's where it started, yeah. And so I remember going to the bishop and talking to him and just saying, why am I having such a hard time with the temple? Like, why does it make me feel terrible inside? And it seems to make everyone else feel amazing, And he just said, I don't think you have to go to the temple. Just don't worry about it. And that also didn't sit well with me, because I was like, well, my whole life I've been singing songs since my childhood about going to the temple. I've had, stake presidents that say, get to the temple, get to the temple. Like, how is it all of a sudden just, don't worry, don't go if it's bothering you? So I was like, something's just not adding up. But I think, then I think that there were other things that I started to see that I just was blind to before, with inequalities with men and women. And I think one time I was out to lunch with some friends and who are both active in the church, and one of them said, do you know who Fanny Alger is? And I was like, no, I've never heard of her. And she said, well, sit to tea with this, Mindy. And then she told me the story of Fanny Alger, and I was like...
Okay, for listeners who have never heard of Fanny Alger, give them the 15-second version.
Okay. Not a historian. Forgive me if I get a few facts wrong. Fanny was 14, maybe 15. We aren't totally sure. She was kind of like a foster daughter to Joseph and Emma Smith. She lived in their home, helped out with their children. I think she was orphaned, but had an uncle and a brother, maybe. Again, facts missing here. But living in Nauvoo. Joseph...
I think it was before Nauvoo. I think it was...
Oh, before Nauvoo?
Yeah, I think it was, yeah. But that's fine. It's all fine.
Okay, anyway.
Mid 1834, 1835, something like that.
Just to make a long story short, Joseph married her in secrecy. Oliver Cowdery is quoted as calling it a dirty, nasty, filthy affair, and he was punished for that.
He was excommunicated, right?
He was excommunicated, I think, yeah. But I think what was really hard for me, that was hard for me, because none of this information is in the correlated materials of the church. Like, I just hadn't really thought about it. I just hadn't thought about Joseph Smith's wives. But after Emma found out, she was very upset, and basically made Joseph annul the marriage. And Fanny was sent away to live in another state. And I just remember thinking, for a 14, 15-year-old girl, how traumatic that must have been, on top of the trauma of her life, you know, like getting to that point. And just thinking, how is that from God? And I think that just initial question, like, when I really thought about that, I literally felt like this hole in the ground open, and I felt myself fall. Like, I felt like the rug had been ripped out from under my feet, like just this house of cards, just, yeah. And I think a lot of people know what I'm talking about when you come to those conclusions that, like, this whole thing you've built your life on is suddenly, like, not true. And I was probably 30 or 31 when this happened. So I also felt like this sudden, like, I just was so acutely aware of myself as a grown adult woman having this experience, and somehow I felt shame or embarrassment, like, that I hadn't seen this before. Like, I was just like, how can I be an adult and not have seen any of this? So that's... So I sat to tea, literally sat to tea with that, and wrote an album with lots of Alice in Wonderland themes.
Because there's tea in Alice in Wonderland, right?
Yes, yeah.
Well, this seems like the perfect place to sing Rabbit Hole. What do you think? Is that all right?
Great.
Is that all right?
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
So we'll invite the musicians up.
Okay.
Little one, you're on the run, like a flickering shadow in the sinking sun. You've covered many miles now, too many miles for being so terribly young. Little one, you hear the call of the wild in the woods when the darkness falls. You take a tumble clumsily, it's nobody's fault you couldn't see. Now you're falling down a rabbit hole. It's terrifying and wonderful. Little one, have a peek through the door and see. To be upside down is a fine way to be. Come sit to tea, drink your fears, swallow the river of your tears, while they're falling down a rabbit hole. It's terrifying and wonderful. Crawling through the rabbit hole. It's death-defying and beautiful. Even when you're broken, there are always doors to open, new dimensions to explore. But you won't know until you're in 1,000 pieces on the floor. And you're falling Thank you.
So beautiful.
Thank you.
So beautiful. Thank you. Not to belabor the point, but just to touch briefly on Fanny Alger, and this is just insider detail, but part of what's troubling about Fanny Alger for me, it's her age, it's the position of power he had, but also what people don't understand is that the polygamy revelation didn't come until the Nauvoo period, which is in the 1840s, but it's even a little bit more complicated than that. The sealing power didn't come until years after. So if he indeed was sealed to her, he somehow did that without the sealing power and without the revelation that actually revealed the law of, eternal marriage or whatever. Then you add the fact that he lied to Emma, and it's just, there's nothing redeemable about that story, and that must have been really hard for you to read.
Yeah, it was. And I think even at that time, I was like, I am only going to read, LDS historian sanctioned, pioneer journals or articles or whatever about this. I never read anything by anybody, but I think it was fairmormon.org is where I read all of those journals. And yeah, those were really hard for me. And yeah, there are a lot of aspects of the story that are hard, but I think it was like that opened the door to like, that's just the tip of the iceberg.
So where did it, the rabbit hole is such a great metaphor. Yeah. So how did it continue falling down that hole for you? What came after?
So I just started to research all of Joseph Smith's wives and just had no idea that there were sisters, mothers and daughters, women who already had husbands, husbands who got sent away on missions and then he married them while they were away. And I was just...
more 14 and 15 year olds.
Yeah, I think all of the distance that I had felt with just living within a patriarchal structure all started to make sense. I just think I felt like, this has been foundational to, I think a lot of just how the patriarchy started out and then the way that women are handled and treated even today. So...
And around what year did that start? Do you remember around what year?
For me?
Yeah.
Let's see. It would have been 2012.
So that's probably right before C.S. Letter came on, before the church essays, long after Mormon Stories had been around. But this, you were learning about all this stuff completely independent of all this stuff.
Yeah, I had never heard of you. I had never heard of anybody doing a podcast or anything. I was just felt like I was on my own on this journey, and I was like the only person in the world going through it. And this went on for a long time, and I had a friend. I only had a few friends, maybe two women, who I think I felt close enough to reach out to. Well, that's not true. I had some sisters who had gone through this journey, but I resolved I actually am not going to go to my sisters to talk about this. I want this journey to be totally my own. I don't want anyone to ever say, oh, your sisters were influential. I didn't tell them about it. I just kind of carried it on my own for a long time, but reached out to an artist friend of mine who you've also interviewed, Sarah Sample. And I just said, I am going through this thing. And I kind of get the feeling that you have too.
You guys were on the Lower Lights together?
Uh-huh.
Did you know her before that even? Or?
Yeah, I knew her before Lower Lights.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah, she said, have you ever heard of this podcast called Mormon Stories? And I was like, no, I've never heard of that. So anyway, but yeah, it was for me, it was, it really just saved me through that time of feeling like I was the only person, just to hear there are other people who are asking these same difficult questions and who are also going through this.
So how did you communicate this with Ryan, and what was that like? Was that hard?
Well, he came home from church after I had read the first article on Fair Mormon about Fanny Alger, and I was literally in a pile on the floor of the kitchen.
Literally.
Literally. Yeah, I was on the floor. I felt like I couldn't even hold my body up, like, because I think just the realization of what this meant, like, just hit me that hard. So he was really scared at first. Yeah, just because it wasn't a story, it wasn't something that he wanted to, like, confront in his own life and think about. But he held me and just, comforted me as best he could.
And I guess everyone's devastation is similar and different. As you were feeling like everything was falling apart, what were some of the pillars of those feelings of devastation, or your fears, or your regrets, or can you describe what?
Yeah, like when you're operating within that paradigm, like the first thing I went to was like, is this gonna affect my marriage? Like, will this like turn my kids against me? Like, you think you're gonna lose your family, and that's like, I can't think of a greater fear for anyone that has a family. Like, so yeah, there was that fear. And then the fear of community, like, how do I find my place in this community? I lived and still live a few blocks east of BYU campus. Still don't know a single family that doesn't have some kind of LDS background in that neighborhood. I mean, there are some families that have gone through this journey as well, but like, I don't know one family that comes from a different religious background or different cultural identity.
Yeah.
So yeah, this fear of losing your community. And also, I was a public figure to so many LDS people. So there was that component of it. Like, I'm kind of like have been in the spotlight and have been a poster child to LDS people in so many ways. So there was that fear also.
And with your dad having had such a high profile position,
that too,
what was it like to contemplate having to tell your parents?
That was also just so terrifying to me. And I just couldn't even do it for the longest time. And I think my dad started to notice, like, and he's a very soft, like, and soft-spoken person. We don't, like, get into super, like, meaty conversations or anything. But he just asked me, one day, like, I noticed you're not wearing your garments anymore. And he got emotional, and so we didn't really, talk about it much. But yeah, and that was huge for me, like letting my parents down. Super terrifying. I'm like shaking right now just thinking about it, It's like, yeah.
And some people kind of peek out and just say, I can't deal with this, and want to just go right back, kind of stuff the genie back in the bottle.
Mm-hmm. That's a good metaphor.
Did you think about that, and what kept you from being able to just go back in the shell because the risk and the pain is too great?
I think I've just always been a person that I have to live authentically. Maybe it's because I'm an artist personality, but I feel like I have to live my feelings out loud, or I feel like I can't function. So I knew it was something that I wasn't going to be able to just stuff back in and just put a smile on my face and walk the walk and talk the talk. Like, that felt so painful. So, but again, I also didn't know how to move forward. So it was just sort of like shedding these layers little by little of this identity that I had held my whole life.
So the next song that we have kind of on the list is called Icarus. Mm-hmm. And if I'm allowed to say this, I think it's my favorite song on the album.
Yay.
Although there's 4 or 5 that I adore at a minimum. And that's just with, 5 or 10 listenings to the album. But why don't you set Icarus up for us?
So I think during this whole journey, isolation is like a huge part of it. So I think while I was trying to figure out how I would move forward and find my next steps, I felt really isolated. I felt like there weren't very many people I could talk to. I felt like I couldn't, just even walking down the street, even though maybe people wouldn't know what I was going through internally, I sort of felt exposed. You just go through this whole weird psychological thing And so I think Icarus is kind of about that isolation. It's about, it's about the story from Greek mythology, where, and I'm going to get all of my names and facts wrong, but Icarus's dad. Can anyone tell me? Daedalus, thank you.
Got an English teacher over here.
Yeah, he and Icarus went to prison because Daedalus wouldn't invent something for... Do you know the story? Now I'm going to forget the whole story I wrote the song about. Anyway, long story short, they were in prison and were trying to figure a way to get out, and Daedalus created these wings for Icarus, but made them out of wax and feathers. And he told Icarus not to fly too close to the sun. And so Icarus did fly too close to the sun, and the wax melted, and he fell into the sea, and he died. But I think that story, I don't know, for me, I felt like there was a really beautiful imagery in there that I could relate to, with falling into this ocean of questions and drowning in it, just this ocean of and just feeling so helpless and alone in that experience. So I felt like I related so much to that story, but then also there's a real element of the song that talks about carrying people when they go through this experience, and carrying them when they fall into that, ocean of questions and mystery. And so I feel like there's also like a hopeful element of the song. It's not all sad.
All right, we bring you Icarus, everybody.
What are those wings? What is that rust? What are those tattered things that make you look like Icarus? Somebody stole your fairy dust, and now the weight inside your chest betrays your wanderlust. So you fall into the waves of 1,000 questions asked but none explained. And now all you can do is to trust that I'll be waiting here to carry you. I will carry you. Spectators come from far away, like they have tickets to the circus on a Saturday. Caught like a child in a parade. You spread your arms, but when you're wounded, you can't fly away. So you fall into the waves of 1,000 questions asked but none explained. And now all you can do is to trust that I'll be waiting here to carry you. I will carry you. Smoke and feathers floating through the sky, like the tears that you cry. Drops of melting wax rain down like fire, and you're so very tired. So you fall into the waves of 1,000 questions asked trust that I'll be waiting here to carry you. I will carry you. What are those wings? What is that rush?
Icarus, so beautiful. Thank you. The next song on our list is called Lines, and we talked a little bit about before kind of what that song means to you. And as you've described it, it talks a little bit about script. So why don't you talk about how maybe your life was scripted before and after, and kind of what inspired this song?
Yeah, so I feel like I was handed this script, like from the time I entered this world. And a lot of parts of that script were really beautiful and great, but I just really went through this process of, after like going down the rabbit hole, writing my new script, and realizing like how much I had not developed like my own just skills of like authenticity and what's the word? Maybe differentiation, autonomy. That's the word. When I was suddenly like, I had to like come up with, well, if this script isn't working out for me, what is real? What is true? Basically just had a little existential crisis. And so this song is really about like me writing my new script, and like also just kind of saying like, I don't want to be fed my lines anymore. I don't want, my lines written for me. I want to write my own lines now. And it also like goes along with the same theme of sitting to tea with these difficult subjects. It's kind of my Mad Hatter tea party song.
All right. So Lines is next.
Lines fabricated to flight airlines, neatly traced and then gathered alike. Paper thin sewing patterns, pinned and in their places. Words, blend them into a batter. Words on a fanciful platter, served by the maddest of hiders, while we fake our faces. But it doesn't matter now. It doesn't matter now. It's all just poison in disguise. Teacups full of candy coated poison in disguise. Teacups full of candy coated lights. Shapes. Oh, society loves their shapes. Cookie cutter lives all half baked, manufactured and sent through quality inspection. 2 or maybe 3 or 4 times the fun could be had if we'd only come to the table to feast with all our imperfections. But it doesn't matter now. It doesn't matter now. It's all just poison in disguise. Teacups full of candy coated poison in disguise. Teacups full of candy coated light. Don't you give me no, don't you give me no
So now I'm just super curious. Are there some particular lines that have been particularly hard for you to have absorbed and now to have to deconstruct and rewrite for yourself?
Yeah, my role as a woman, what it means to be somebody's wife, a mother, all of those things that were scripted for me, I've had to reconstruct. And just the way, there's just so much. I don't even know how to answer that question. But that one's really pivotal, for me. And then just, thinking about like the life after this, if there is one, just all of the script for what comes next after this existence. I think that one is really hard because this great plan of happiness is handed to you. And so then when you have to start over with that, what is the script for that? You know? And so I think for me, at first that was a really terrifying thing. And now I think it's a really beautiful thing to live in the questions, to not have the answer to everything, that we're all in this together, that none of us really has the answer. Even the most spiritual beings on this planet just don't know. So
really quickly, with one very common thing for people to experience in a faith crisis is you kind of look over at your partner and you're like, wait a minute, I married you with a worldview that now is completely no longer any part of me. You know, number one, would I have even married you if I had a different worldview? And then number two, do we even want to remain together? Mm-hmm. Because the pillars upon which our relationship was built have now kind of crumbled.
Yeah.
How's Ryan doing? And have you guys had to kind of decide if you wanted to have a renovation of your relationship kind of in this process?
I think that the renovation of our relationship just kind of came naturally with the process. We didn't like sit down and like plan it out. It just kind of happened. But I think for anybody in this situation, it would be terrifying and difficult. And it was for both of us. But we have like a better marriage and relationship than we ever had prior to this.
Now someone's going to say, how's that possible with the gospel and its supportive families? And I know this because I counsel a lot of couples, but how in the world can a marriage improve after a disillusion of faith?
Yeah. That's a great question. And when I first started going through this, I actually went to see a therapist about this. And I actually felt like they gave me some really bad advice. But the therapist had also gone through this process. And they told me at the very end, as I was leaving, they said, like, I don't want you to leave on a downer note, but I also want to prepare you for the, very great possibility that your marriage might not survive this. And a lot of people's don't. And I don't know. I'm not, and maybe that's true. I don't know, but I don't know that was a very fair thing for her to like somehow prep me as I left, like that thought. And maybe it goes back to that thing about me where I have this drive and I'm so driven when someone tells me, no, you can't do that or that won't work. I'm like, yes, I can. And yes, it will. So I think I left more committed to my marriage than ever. And I think when you go through the trenches with somebody, it can't always work out for everybody. And, there are good reasons for that. But if you have to go to hell and back together, I think your relationship is stronger because of that. So I think that's what we've been through.
And what are a few ways that the relationship's better now than before? Just a few dimensions.
Oh, just so much less judgment, so much less shame. I just feel like I can say anything and, I don't think I felt like that before. I definitely couldn't say exactly what I was thinking or feeling in our marriage prior to that.
So better communication, authenticity, yes, which leads to vulnerability, which leads to better emotional intimacy.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm so happy for you guys.
Thank you.